For 4 years, I paid for their peace. But last week, on the day I graduated from Harvard, they didn't show up. The campus bell had barely finished ringing when the crowd erupted, families hugging, cameras flashing, names being called one after another. And yet, the 2 seats I reserved in the front row stayed empty, like small, silent witnesses of everything I refused to admit. I told myself maybe traffic was bad, maybe mom forgot to charge her phone. I waited until the ceremony ended, still believing that any second now, I'd see them walking toward me, waving, smiling. Instead, when I finally called, the voice that answered was cold enough to burn. "You mean nothing to us," my father said. No hesitation, no anger, just ice. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The sound of celebration around me faded, and all I could hear was the dial tone echoing in my ear. That was the last time I called home. "Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now?" Because maybe, somewhere out there, you've felt the same sting. My name is Masha William, 27 years old, graduate student in behavioral neuroscience at Harvard University. On paper, it sounds impressive: Harvard, research labs, scholarships. But behind every title, there's a small apartment with buzzing radiators, a second-hand kettle, and a girl who sends most of her paycheck to a place she no longer calls home. Every Friday at exactly 6:30 a.m., before the city fully woke, I sat at my desk with a chipped mug of cold coffee beside me and opened my laptop. The screen's blue light washed over my face as the cursor blinked in the transfer box. $650. The amount never changed. Rent for guilt, interest for peace. I'd stare at the number for a few seconds, sometimes biting my lip hard enough to taste metal, then click send. Payment sent. That small confirmation banner always appeared like a heartbeat on the screen, predictable, mechanical, cruelly comforting. It had started 4 years earlier, the summer I left for Harvard. My parents had debts: credit cards, late utilities, something about Dad's business loan. They said it was the price of raising me through hard years. Mom reminded me, again and again, that education costs more than tuition. "We sacrificed everything," she'd say, leaning against the kitchen counter, her voice soft but edged with steel. "You can't put a price on that." So I didn't try to. I just paid. Harvard gave me a full scholarship, but scholarships don't buy groceries or winter coats. To cover my own expenses, I worked part-time as a research assistant in the psychology lab. 42 hours a week running cognitive trials, cleaning glassware, logging endless lines of data. And from those wages, every Friday, I sent them $650. They never asked for explanations about my studies, my papers, my exhaustion. Only receipts. Mom sent emails that read like invoices. Electricity bill went up again. Dad's medication refill $180. Insurance due $220. The washing machine stopped working, $160 to fix. "We're counting on you." Sometimes she added a little note at the end. "Love you. Don't forget where you came from." Though, I would stare at those words, "love you," and wonder if they meant thank you for the money instead. Each week followed the same ritual. Wake up before sunrise, open the banking app, stare at the balance, and press send. It wasn't generosity anymore, it was muscle memory. An obligation so familiar it felt like breathing. Payment sent. In the lab, when colleagues discussed their weekend plans, movies, road trips, brunches, I'd smile politely, saying I had budget things to sort out. What I meant was, I had a promise to keep, a silence to maintain. The guilt didn't make sense, but it ruled me. Every transfer felt like an apology for existing. Sometimes I'd catch myself doing the math unconsciously: how much I could have saved, how many hours of sleep I'd lost, how many nights I'd skipped dinner to make sure I never missed a payment. I told myself it was okay. That this was repayment, that good daughters give back. That maybe, if I gave enough, they'd finally forgive me for being born inconveniently. Once, during a late night in the lab, I told my supervisor, Dr. Patel, that I couldn't afford a conference trip. She frowned. But the grant covers everything. I just can't be away that weekend. I lied. Because that weekend was the first Friday of the month rent week for them. The transfer couldn't be delayed. Guilt has its own calendar. My phone kept every transaction like a diary of obedience. Transfer confirmed, $650 to Helen and Robert William. Each line a pulse. Each line proof that I still belonged somewhere, even if that belonging was one-sided. Once, I almost stopped. It was January, bitter cold. My hands were cracked from the walk to campus. I'd just received my tax return extra money I desperately needed for a new winter coat. Instead, I sat at my desk, staring at the screen for nearly an hour. My thumb hovered over send. Then Mom's email came through. He's been coughing again. The meds are expensive. Please don't let us down. So I didn't. I hit send. Payment sent. The sound of the confirmation ping felt like a door slamming shut. In those moments, I tried to convince myself that this was love, quiet, invisible, responsible love. But somewhere deep inside, I knew better. It wasn't love, it was guilt. Routine. And hope they'd someday see me as more than an accident. That sentence looped in my head like an echo I couldn't mute. I remembered the night I first heard the word accident. I was 12, sitting on the stairs after bedtime, listening to my parents argue. My father's voice rose, tired and bitter. We weren't ready for her. She was a mistake. My mother didn't deny it. She just said, we did what we could. Maybe that's when the debt began. Now, years later, I was still trying to pay it off $650 at a time. Every week, the same ritual repeated, predictable as sunrise. Click. Confirm. Close. I rarely thought about what they did with the money. I only thought about what might happen if I stopped sending it. Maybe they'd call. Maybe they'd curse. Maybe they'd finally cut me off completely, and that, somehow, still felt worse than bleeding for them. On the mornings after each transfer, I'd sit at my small kitchen table, watching the early light slide across my coffee mug, and whisper, this will be the last time. It never was. People think abuse always sounds like shouting, but sometimes it sounds like thank you. Sometimes it looks like tidy lists of expenses and ends with, we're proud of you, that you know are lies. Every Friday, the world outside my window changed, seasons passing, students coming and going, but my ritual stayed constant. It gave my chaos structure, my guilt rhythm. Payment sent. 3 words that meant I could breathe again. 3 words that meant they still needed me. I didn't know then that the peace I was buying was counterfeit, that the next time I opened that banking app, it wouldn't be to send money. It would be to stop. Despite everything, I still tried to keep the connection alive. I told myself that love, real love, didn't vanish. It just needed patience, proof, and time, so I kept sending pictures. Small snapshots of a world they'd never visited. The Harvard Library glowing at sunset, the Charles River frozen under a thin sheen of ice. My research group huddled around a whiteboard filled with equations and sticky notes. I'd caption them lightly, thought you'd like to see where I spend most of my days, as if I were writing to parents who cared. Most of the time, there was no reply. Once in a while, Mom sent a thumbs up emoji or the words, busy, talk later. But I kept trying. Part of me believed that silence wasn't rejection, only hesitation. That they were just waiting for the right moment to say they were proud. When the university sent the graduation invitations, I drafted my email to them carefully, rewriting it 5 times before pressing send. The ceremony will be next Saturday at 10 a.m. I've reserved 2 seats in the front row under my name. Please come, it would mean the world to me. I hesitated before clicking send, staring at the blinking cursor like it might talk me out of it. A part of me whispered that I was setting myself up for disappointment again. But another part, the one that still wanted to be someone's daughter, pressed the button anyway. The reply came a day later. Just 2 words. We'll see. It wasn't yes, But it wasn't no either. And in the fragile world I'd built around hope, we'll see, was enough. I read it over and over, imagining what it might really mean. Maybe they were planning something special. Maybe they wanted to surprise me. Maybe they just didn't want to ruin it by saying too much. That week, I walked through the Harvard yard differently. Every building looked softer, like it belonged to a movie about redemption. The bell tower's chime sounded less lonely. Even the cold Boston wind felt kind. I let myself picture it the moment I would step onto the stage in my cap and gown, scanning the crowd until I spotted them. Dad in his old gray jacket, Mom holding her phone high to record, both of them smiling through tears. I could almost hear her voice. "That's our girl." Oh bye. I even bought a small red flower pin from a vendor near Harvard Square. Months earlier, I had mentioned to Mom that I'd wear something bright so they could spot me easily in the crowd. She hadn't replied, but I'd kept the idea. I pressed the flower between the pages of my notebook until the day came. At night, when exhaustion from lab work blurred my vision, I'd close my eyes and see that scene like a promise me walking across the stage, them waiting below, years of distance dissolving in one proud, impossible second. I still believed pride fades. I'd whisper to myself when doubt crept in, that maybe, for one day, love would beat resentment. That belief, fragile as glass, was the only thing that kept me standing when the ceremony finally arrived. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to learn what happens when you wait for people who never planned to come. Graduation morning arrived wrapped in soft light, the kind of golden air that makes everything look cleaner, kinder, and almost cinematic. Harvard Yard was already alive when I stepped through the gates. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the grass, crimson banners hung from the old brick buildings, and the bell tower released a deep, resonant toll that echoed over the crowd. The stage was lined with flowers. Professors in their robes laughed among themselves, their sleeves catching the sunlight. The air smelled faintly of rain and fresh paper. My hands were trembling as I adjusted my cap. I told myself it was excitement, not nerves. The red flower I'd pinned to my gown glowed against the dark fabric, a small, stubborn symbol of faith that my parents would find me among thousands. The ceremony began with applause that seemed to come from every direction. Families waved flags, held up banners, shouted their children's names with the kind of pride that bends the air itself. Cameras clicked like tiny heartbeats. Somewhere, a little girl squealed as her brother's name was called, and a mother beside her laughed through tears. I smiled, even though my own name hadn't yet been said. My two reserved seats in the front row C, numbers 12 and 13, were still empty. I told myself they were just late, maybe traffic. Maybe they stopped for coffee, or got lost among the maze of campus gates. They'd come, they had to. As the dean's voice rose and fell, calling out degrees, names, honors, I kept scanning the crowd. My eyes lingered on every woman in a blue dress, every man in a gray jacket, hoping one might be my mother or father. They never were. When my name was finally called, the sound of applause around me felt borrowed, louder than I deserved, and yet not meant for me. I stepped forward anyway, heart racing, smile fixed. The sunlight hit my face as I reached out for the diploma folder. The dean shook my hand warmly. "Congratulations, Miss William," he said. "Harvard is proud of you." For a moment, I almost believed that was enough. I turned to face the audience, lifting the diploma just slightly, pretending for the sake of the photograph that I'd found them in the crowd. The seats were still empty. The camera flash went off, and my eyes watered, though not from the light. When I returned to my chair, a professor I knew from the lab leaned forward and whispered, "Your family's stuck in traffic?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Maybe." He nodded kindly, as if that small word explained everything. After the ceremony, the courtyard transformed into a sea of joy. Students posed in clusters, caps flying, flowers exchanged, champagne corks popping. Families filled the air with laughter and hugs. Everywhere I looked, there were arms around shoulders, parents crying into their children's robes, the clicking of phone cameras preserving everything that mattered. I stood apart from it all, holding my diploma like something fragile. My flower pin had begun to droop in the sunday. I thought about walking over to one of the official photographers, but what picture was I going to take me, alone, against a backdrop of other people's happiness? Instead, I walked toward the edge of the yard, where the crowd thinned. The bell tower's final chime rang out across the green. It was supposed to mark the beginning of new lives. For me, it just sounded like an ending. I sat down on a low stone wall beneath a tree. My phone buzzed in my bag, startling me. For half a second, my chest leapt. Maybe it was them. Maybe they were calling to say they were on their way, that they'd made it, that I could still look up and see them waving from the gate. I pulled the phone out, heart pounding. One message. From Mom. It said, "Tell us when you send this week's money." That was all. No congratulations. No, we're proud of you. Not even sorry we missed it. Just business. The kind of message that could have come any other Friday, on any other week, except this was supposed to be the day that proved I'd made them proud. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Around me, a girl nearby laughed as her parents handed her a bouquet twice the size of her diploma. Someone popped another bottle. A father lifted his daughter onto his shoulders for a photo. I typed a reply, then deleted it. My fingers hovered above the keyboard before finally locking the screen. The silence between us stretched like a chasm I could finally see. For years, I had built a bridge of money and obedience to reach across it, believing it would hold. But sitting there, surrounded by applause that wasn't mine, I realized that bridge had never been real. It was just the illusion of connection, one payment at a time. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking slightly, but my chest felt hollow, calm. The kind of calm that comes when there's nothing left to fight for. The red flower on my gown caught a gust of wind and fluttered loose. I watched it fall onto the grass, its petals folding inward as if closing its eyes. I stood, slipped my phone into my pocket, and walked out of the yard without looking back. Behind me, the laughter and cameras faded into a soft, distant hum. In front of me, the sunlight pooled on the brick path, bright and unmerciful. I didn't know it yet, but that message, that single, heartless line, would be the last thread I'd ever let them pull. The crowd had thinned by the time I reached the gate. Banners were being taken down, the air smelled faintly of trampled grass and champagne, and the laughter had dissolved into distant echoes. I stood just outside Harvard Yard, clutching my diploma, watching the last clusters of families drift toward taxis and waiting cars. My 2 empty seats flashed in my mind again, bright red, untouched, accusatory. I told myself there had to be a reason. A good one. I pulled out my phone and stared at it for a long time. My fingers hovered over Dad's number, the one I'd memorized when I was 8 because he always made me dial it myself when I needed something. My thumb trembled, but I pressed call. The ringing stretched into eternity, 3 tones, then 4 before a familiar click. What is it? His voice came through rough, tired, and edged with irritation, the same tone he used whenever I interrupted him. I swallowed, forcing my voice steady. "Hi, Dad. It's me. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I didn't see you or Mom at the ceremony today, so I thought maybe—" He interrupted before I could finish. "We didn't come." The words were so blunt they didn't register at first. I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "Oh," I managed. "Was there traffic? Or maybe—" "No," he said flatly. "We didn't feel like it." Something inside me jolted, like a wire snapping. "You didn't feel like it?" He sighed heavily, as though my confusion annoyed him. "We're tired, Masha. Your mother's been dealing with her migraines. Besides, it's just a ceremony. You already got your diploma. What's the point of sitting there for hours? You think that makes you special?" My throat tightened. "It's not about being special," I said softly. "It's Harvard, Dad. I just wanted you there. I wanted—" He cut me off again, his voice colder now, the weariness gone, replaced by that familiar undercurrent of disdain. "You wanted You think everything is about what you want. You don't get it, do you? You mean nothing to us, Masha. Stop pretending this family still exists. And then, just like that, the line went dead. No anger, no shouting, just a click. The silence that followed was louder than anything I'd ever heard. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. The breeze picked up, tugging at my gown, whipping it against my legs. My diploma slipped slightly in my grip. My mouth was open, but no sound came out. Around me, the world continued as if nothing had happened. Students laughing, car doors slamming, the hum of traffic beyond the gates. The bell tower struck once, its echo long and low. I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck somewhere between my ribs and my throat. My body refused to move. I pulled the phone away and stared at the black screen. The call timer blinked. 0:43 seconds. That was all it took to destroy 4 years of illusions. I stood there until the yard emptied completely, until only the faint sound of sweeping and distant footsteps remained. The sunlight dimmed into that soft, golden haze that makes the world look too beautiful for the pain it contains. The wind lifted the hem of my gown again, twisting it around my legs. I could smell rain in the air, sharp and metallic. A paper cup rolled across the pavement, hitting my shoe with a hollow thud. My mind kept replaying his voice, like a cruel recording I couldn't turn off. You mean nothing to us. The words looped endlessly, wrapping tighter around my chest. I should have cried. That's what people do when their world collapses. But nothing came. No tears, no rage. Just the same stillness that follows a storm after it's torn everything apart. I didn't cry, I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible over the wind. I just started shaking. The tremor began in my hands, then traveled up my arms, a steady rhythm like the aftershock of an earthquake. I tried to breathe, but even that hurt like the air itself was too heavy. I walked slowly toward the iron gate, the one every Harvard student passes through at least twice. Once when they arrive, once when they leave. As I stepped outside, I looked back at the yard at the stage, the empty chairs, the remnants of celebration scattered across the grass. For 4 years, I had worked to get here. I thought this moment would heal something. Instead, it broke the last part of me that still believed in home. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass of a nearby building, cap askew, lipstick faded, eyes hollow. A stranger in a borrowed costume. People passed by without noticing. They had families waiting, dinners to attend, laughter to share. I had a phone full of unanswered messages and a voice still echoing in my head. The wind grew colder. I slipped the phone into my bag, feeling its weight like a reminder. One last gust caught the edges of my gown, billowing it around me before dying down again. The world was still. Somewhere behind me, the bells began to ring again, marking another hour, another ending. I stood there, listening to them fade into silence, knowing that in less than a minute, I would walk away from the version of myself who still believed they cared. And when I finally took that first step, the shaking stopped not because the pain was gone, but because I had nothing left to hold on to. When I got back to my apartment that evening, the city was wrapped in that post-storm quiet street slick with leftover rain, windows glowing with the kind of warmth that always belonged to someone else. My robe was still damp from the wind, my hair clinging to the back of my neck. I dropped my bag by the door and stood there for a moment, unsure what to do next. The air smelled faintly of dust and chamomile. On the kitchen counter, my mug from that morning still sat half full, the tea now cold and translucent. I didn't bother turning on the light. The soft hum of the refrigerator filled the room like background noise to a life I barely recognized. I took off my cap, set it next to the unopened envelope that held my diploma, and finally exhaled. Then I opened my banking app. The screen's glow illuminated my face, pale and sharp against the dark. My fingers hesitated above the glass, as if muscle memory might take over and make the same Friday ritual happen automatically. Recurring transfers active. The list appeared, neat and merciless. $650 every week, Friday, 6:30 a.m., to Helen and Robert William. 4 years of obedience compressed into one clean line of code. I scrolled down, seeing the endless history of transactions, each one a timestamp of guilt. My thumb hovered over the small gray button beside it. Cancel. For a moment, I heard Dad's voice again, cutting through the silence like static. You mean nothing to us. I almost dropped the phone. My hands were trembling so badly that the screen blurred. But then, something shifted. It was small, an exhale that sounded more like defiance than grief. I pressed cancel. A new message appeared. Are you sure you want to delete this recurring transfer? I stared at the question. It felt absurd that freedom could fit into a single yes or no box. My thumb moved before I could change my mind. Confirm. The sound it made was almost imperceptible, a soft click, like a lock turning. The list refreshed. The transfer was gone. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until my chest started to ache. Slowly, I leaned against the counter, phone still in hand. The tremor in my fingers softened. My pulse, once frantic, began to steady. For 4 years, I whispered to no one. Guilt had its own calendar. I looked down at the phone's blank screen, its glow fading into darkness. I just deleted it. The words hung in the air, fragile but final. I set the phone on the counter. My hands were still unsteady, but something inside me had gone eerily calm, like the sea after a storm has spent itself. I filled the kettle, listening to the soft rush of water. The sound was grounding, real. When it began to boil, the faint hiss filled the silence the way conversation once did. I poured the hot water over a new tea bag and watched the color bloom, amber swirling into gold. Steam rose, carrying the scent of mint and metal. I wrapped both hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. Outside, a car door slammed, followed by laughter echoing down the street. Somewhere, life was still happening. For the first time, I didn't feel left out of it. I just didn't want to be part of the noise anymore. I sat at the small table by the window, sipping slowly. My hands stopped shaking halfway through. My heartbeat, which had been a drum for weeks, finally found a rhythm that wasn't survival. The room was almost completely dark now, except for the glow from a streetlight outside. The light spilled across the floor, touching the kettle, the empty diploma envelope, the corner of the phone that would no longer vibrate with their messages. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. There were no fireworks, no applause, just quiet. And that quiet felt holy. The kettle clicked softly as it cooled, the metal contracting with a sound like a sigh. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a reply, or a bill, or a command disguised as love. The room went silent. Not empty, just clean. 30 minutes later, just as the tea had gone cold and my heartbeat had learned the rhythm of silence, my phone buzzed. A single vibration, soft, almost apologetic, echoed across the counter. I didn't move at first. I knew that sound too well. It had always meant one thing, a demand disguised as a conversation. The screen lit up in the dim kitchen light. One message, Mom. We ran out of groceries. Can you send $200 tonight? No greeting. No mention of the ceremony. Not even my name. Just a request, as mechanical and inevitable as gravity. I stared at the message, thumb hovering above the keyboard out of reflex. For years, this had been my cue to act, to open the app, to send, to buy peace before conflict could start. The old instinct pulsed beneath my skin, automatic and familiar. But something inside me had shifted. Maybe it was the echo of that call, or the image of those empty chairs in the yard, or the sound of the bell ringing for someone else's celebration. Whatever it was, it held my hand still. I reread the message slowly, as if deciphering a foreign language. We ran out of groceries. The words looked innocent enough, almost pitiful. But behind them, I heard everything she wasn't saying. You owe us. You always will. For the first time, The guilt didn't tighten around my chest. It recoiled, like a shadow shrinking from light. I set the phone face down on the counter. The screen lit up again, another vibration, another insistence, but I didn't look. Instead, I mimoy, pressed my fingers against the ceramic edge of my mug, and whispered, "No." Oh. It was the smallest word, but it felt enormous, filling the room like oxygen after years of holding my breath. That was the first time, I murmured to myself, I didn't buy peace. The sentence came out steady, grounded, final. I walked to the window and pushed it open. The night air rushed in cold, sharp, carrying the scent of rain-soaked concrete, the kind of air that clears the mind. Below, Cambridge was quiet, the street lamps flickering against puddles that shimmered like broken mirrors. I stepped out onto the small balcony, wrapping my arms around myself. The city hummed faintly, a bus in the distance, a siren far away, but here, it was just me and the wind. My breath came out visible, curling in the chill. On the small table beside the railing, a crumpled sheet of paper caught my eye, the last printed record of my bank transfers. Across the top, in neat typeface, it read, "Transfer scheduled." The corner fluttered in the breeze. I picked it up, held it for a second between my fingers, then let go. The wind caught it instantly, spinning it upward before it drifted out into the dark, vanishing like smoke. For years, those words had been a commandment. Proof that I was good, obedient, necessary. Watching them disappear felt like releasing a ghost I hadn't realized was haunting me. I stood there for a while, watching the lights of the city blur into one long golden line. Somewhere, I imagined them, my parents sitting at their kitchen table, waiting for a sound that wouldn't come. The ping of a transaction, the proof of my devotion. I wondered if they'd notice right away. If they'd feel it like I did, a sudden absence, a silence too sharp to ignore. Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't. But for the first time, it didn't matter. The wind picked up again, tugging gently at my sleeves, carrying with it the faint smell of something clean: rain, mint, and freedom. That was the night, I said quietly, leaning against the railing, the guilt died. A week later, just when the silence had begun to feel like peace, my name started to circulate online. It began innocently, a few notifications, messages from old classmates I hadn't heard from in years, a vague sense that something was moving beneath the surface. Then, that Sunday morning, while I was grading papers at my kitchen table, I saw it. A Facebook post from Helen and Robert William. My parents. The video thumbnail showed them sitting together on the couch I grew up on, the faded floral print and the crooked family photo still hanging behind them. The title stopped me cold. Our daughter abandoned us after Harvard. For a moment, I thought it had to be a joke. I clicked. The video opened with my mother's voice, trembling in that perfectly rehearsed way she used to get out of parking tickets. "We gave her everything," she began, dabbing at eyes that weren't wet. "All our savings, all our love. We supported her dreams, even when she forgot us. But now she's gone. Not a call, not a visit. Nothing." My father sat beside her, jaw tight, arms crossed, silent for effect. When he finally spoke, his tone carried that tired martyrdom he used whenever life didn't bend to his will. "We tried to raise her right," he said. "We told her to be humble, to remember where she came from. But she thinks Harvard makes her better than us." Mom nodded, adding, "She used to send money until she decided we weren't worth her time." It's sad what pride does to a person. They spoke for 12 minutes. 12 minutes of half-truths and polished lies, of twisting love into obligation, of rewriting history until they looked like saints and I became the ungrateful child who threw her parents away. By the time it ended, the video had over 4,000 views and hundreds of comments. Old neighbors, distant relatives, church members. What a shame, kids today forget who raised them. They sacrificed everything for her. Typical Harvard arrogance. God will humble her. On tree. Each comment felt like a small stone being hurled at my chest. I didn't cry this time. I just stared at the screen, the same way one might watch a car crash in slow motion, unable to look away, even as it destroyed something vital. For the rest of the day, I ignored my phone. But the pings kept coming: text messages, missed calls, even emails from people I barely knew. Everyone wanted a comment, an explanation, a reaction. I gave them none. 2 days later, my phone buzzed again, but this time, it was a name I hadn't seen in years. Ben. My younger brother. "You're not alone," the message read. I was paying too. My breath caught. I typed back immediately. "What do you mean?" "They told me they were drowning in debt. Said you'd stopped helping. I've been sending $300 every week for 2 years." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. "They told me the same thing about you," I replied. "That you refused to help. That I was the only one still loyal." Ben's typing bubble appeared, then vanished, then reappeared. Finally. I thought I could earn their love back. I thought if I just kept sending money, they'd forgive me for leaving. "Me too," I wrote. There it was. The truth neither of us had dared to name. For years, we'd been financing a ghost paying rent on a relationship that had already burned down. We called that night. The last time I'd heard his voice, he was still in college, still hopeful. Now, his tone carried the same exhaustion I recognized in my own. "I thought maybe they'd change when you graduated," he said quietly. "That they'd finally see you for what you've done." "I thought the same," I said. "But they didn't come, they didn't even pretend to try." There was silence for a while. Then Ben laughed, dry and bitter. "Guess they finally found a new way to get paid sympathy." His joke shouldn't have hurt, but it did, because it was true. That night, we talked until past midnight, trading memories like puzzle pieces. We pieced together the years of manipulation, the way Mom used guilt like currency, the way Dad weaponized silence, the lies they fed each of us to keep us competing for affection that never existed. "They made us feel like rescuers," Ben said. "But really, we were just the supply." It was the kind of clarity that left you dizzy. The next morning, the story began to shift. Someone no one knew who had uploaded a screen recording from an older, unedited version of my parents' Facebook livestream. In it, the performance faltered. My father, thinking the camera was off, leaned back and muttered, "She means nothing to us. Stop pretending this family still exists." My mother didn't flinch. She just nodded and said, "Then cut that part before you post." The video was only 14 seconds long, but it spread like wildfire. People who'd once pitied them reposted it with captions like, "Guess the truth always leaks." Others stitched it into reaction videos, their faces twisted in disbelief. "She means nothing to us," one user repeated. "After taking her money for years? Wow. The manipulation here is wild." This poor girl. Within 48 hours, their victim narrative collapsed. The video they'd crafted so carefully was now evidence of their cruelty. Comment sections turned against them, and the same people who had scolded me a week earlier began quietly deleting their words. Ben texted me again. "They're panicking. Mom's crying on live again. Dad's blaming hackers." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The internet did what I never could. It held them accountable. Every time they tried to delete the clip, someone reposted it. The phrase, "She means nothing to us," became a headline, a hashtag, a mirror they couldn't look away from. By the weekend, they'd locked their accounts. The church that once praised them removed their names from the newsletter. Their friends went quiet. The same neighbors who used to gossip about my Harvard pride now whispered about theirs. "Those Harvard parents," one woman said in a local livestream someone sent me, "guess they finally got schooled." I didn't laugh. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow. Like justice had arrived but forgot to knock first. Because this wasn't victory. It was exposure. And exposure doesn't heal, it just ends the pretending. Still, something inside me eased. For years, I had paid to maintain their illusion of decency. Now the world had seen it for what it was: rotted underneath, polished on the surface. Ben called that Sunday night. His voice was calm this time. "I guess it's over," he said. "Maybe it's just beginning," I answered. He was quiet for a while before saying, "You know, you don't have to carry this anymore." Ah. I looked out my window at the quiet street below, the reflection of my teacup trembling in the glass. "I know," I said. "But it's strange learning to live without guilt. It's like missing a noise that's been in the background your whole life." He chuckled softly. "Silence takes practice." "I'll learn," I said. And I did. In the weeks that followed, I watched the story die down the way storms do, loud, chaotic, then suddenly gone. My parents became whispers in their own town, faces people turned away from in the grocery store. No one defended them anymore. No one believed the act. I didn't post, didn't speak, didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. The truth had already done the talking. Sometimes, karma doesn't need an audience, it just needs time. The silence that followed their humiliation online stretched into weeks. Their Facebook accounts went dark, the videos were deleted, and the once busy comment threads filled with nothing but echoing emptiness. I stopped checking. I didn't need to. The world had already done what I never could turn away. Then, one morning, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity made me play it anyway. A man's voice, calm but strained. "This is Peter from Colonial Properties. I've been trying to reach your parents about the rent on their apartment. It's 2 months overdue. They said you usually handle it." He paused, then added almost apologetically, "I just wanted to confirm before I file the eviction paperwork." I stood in the kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, the steam from my tea curling toward the ceiling. When he called again that afternoon, I answered. "Miss William?" "Yes, I'm sorry to bother you," he said, lowering his voice. "But your parents gave me your number. They insisted you'd take care of the payment today. I just wanted to check if that's correct." I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. "Not anymore," I said quietly. There was a pause, long, awkward, as if he didn't know what to do with my answer. "Understood," he finally said. "Thank you for clarifying." When the call ended, I didn't feel triumph, just finality. A week later, the gossip began to trickle in. In the small town where I grew up, news traveled faster than mail. One of Ben's friends still lived there, and he sent me a short text. "They're being evicted. Neighbors say they packed their things in trash bags." Another message followed hours later. "People are talking." Someone said, "Those Harvard parents, huh? Guess the act doesn't pay rent." I sat at my desk, reading those words again and again, the irony sinking in. For years, they'd paraded my education like a trophy, bragging about their Harvard daughter at church gatherings, using my achievements as currency for their image. Now that same title had turned into their shame. Ben called me that evening. I could hear the uncertainty in his voice, the hesitation between sympathy and relief. "They're moving in with Aunt Clara," he said. "For now, at least." "Did she agree to that?" He sighed. "Not exactly. She said they could stay for a few days until they figure things out, but I don't think it's going well." He was right. 2 days later, I received a video from him. "You need to see this," his message read. The video was grainy, filmed on a phone from across a living room. It showed a gathering, our extended family, seated around Aunt Clara's table. My parents sat near the far end, small and deflated. The atmosphere was heavy, the kind of quiet that feels like waiting for a storm. My father's voice came first, softer than I'd ever heard it. "It's all been blown out of proportion," he said. "That recording online, it wasn't real. People twisted our words." My mother nodded, eyes downcast. "We never said she meant nothing. We were angry. You all know how kids can be. She left us, Enough," Aunt Clara's voice cut in, firm and unwavering. "Do you really think anyone here believes that?" The camera shifted slightly, catching a glimpse of her holding up her phone. The screen glowed blue. She tapped play, and through the tiny speaker, my father's own voice filled the room. "She means nothing to us. Stop pretending this family still exists." The sound was clearer than I remembered. No one moved. My parents froze. My mother's face drained of color, and my father's mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence that followed was suffocating. You could hear the clock ticking in the background, the faint hum of the refrigerator, even someone's uneasy breathing. Then, from somewhere in the room, a voice broke through low, steady, and final. "If that's how you treat your daughter," a relative said, "you don't deserve her." It wasn't shouted, wasn't dramatic, just truth. My father blinked, looked down at his hands. My mother whispered something I couldn't catch. Then, slowly, they both stood. No excuses, no tears. Just silence. They walked out of the room together, the door creaking open and closing behind them. The recording ended there, the screen fading to black. I watched it twice. Maybe 3 times. Not because I wanted to see them humiliated, but because I couldn't quite believe it had happened. For so long, I'd thought their pride was indestructible. To watch it crumble not in anger, but in quiet recognition felt surreal. Ben called moments later. "Did you see it?" "Yes. They're staying at a motel now," he said. "No one's answering their calls. Even church cut them off. Pastor Lewis told them they needed to reflect before returning." I nodded silently, though he couldn't see me. For years, I'd dreamed of them understanding what they'd done. I used to imagine standing in front of them, listing every hurt, every lie, and watching realization dawn in their eyes. But now that the truth had come on its own, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. Quiet. Heavy, necessary. Later that night, I sat at my desk, the apartment wrapped in darkness except for the faint city glow filtering through the blinds. My laptop was still open, the video paused on their exit, the door halfway closed, their silhouettes vanishing into the hall. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. My reflection shimmered in the screen, layered over theirs. "Sometimes karma doesn't need an audience," I whispered. "It just needs time." The words settled in the air, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the window. I let it play its rhythm while I sat there, motionless, the sound washing over me like something cleansing. For the first time, I didn't feel angry, or sad, or even vindicated. I just felt free. After the dust settled, I packed what little I had and moved into a smaller apartment just outside Cambridge. A narrow brick building with ivy climbing its walls and windows that caught the morning sunday. The space was quiet, almost bare, but every corner felt like mine. I didn't need much anymore, just a desk by the window, a kettle that worked, and air that didn't carry anyone else's expectations. The first few weeks passed in a strange rhythm. I taught part-time at Harvard Extension School Introduction to Behavioral Psychology. The irony wasn't lost on me, standing in front of a class explaining trauma, resilience, and learned helplessness while I was still learning how to breathe without guilt. But the students were different from the ones I'd known before, older, humbler, hungry for change. They weren't there for prestige or titles. They were there because life had told them no, and they wanted to find a way to say yes again. I recognized that hunger. It was the same one that had kept me alive. Each night, I walked home through Harvard Square, past the smell of coffee and old books. The city that once made me feel small now felt human again. I'd pass the same bench near the yard gate, the one where I'd stood on graduation day waiting for people who never came, and for the first time, I didn't look away. I just nodded at it, quietly, like acknowledging a ghost who'd finally stopped haunting me. One Friday evening, just as the last of autumn's leaves scattered across the sidewalk, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, Ben stood there, holding a grocery bag in one arm and a small bouquet of daisies in the other. "You still like chocolate cake?" he asked. I smiled, the kind that starts small and grows. "You remembered?" "Barely. It was on sale." He grinned, stepping inside. The apartment filled quickly with the scent of frosting and laughter. We ate at my little table by the window, the sound of city traffic humming beneath our voices. Ben looked around, nodding slowly. "This place suits you. It's calm." "I like the quiet," I said. "No one shouting, no one keeping score." He hesitated, then said softly, "You seem lighter." I poured him more tea. Maybe I finally stopped carrying what wasn't mine. For a while, we ate in silence, the comfortable kind that comes only after years of misunderstanding. When he finished his slice, Ben leaned back and said, half smiling, "You know, we finally graduated from them." I blinked. "What?" He gestured around the room. "This. Us. The freedom. We spent years earning degrees, chasing approval, paying tuition for a love that never existed. But this," he waved his fork for emphasis, "this is the real graduation. The day we stop trying to pass their test." I laughed softly, the sound catching in my throat. "You're right. We graduated twice." Then, the phrase stuck with me long after he said it. Later that night, after we washed the dishes and the city quieted, I found myself at my desk, staring at the shelf above it. My Harvard diploma rested there in its frame, next to a folded piece of paper I'd kept all this time, the last printed receipt of my payments. The words "transfer scheduled" were still visible across the top, though the ink had faded slightly. I reached for it, then tore it cleanly in half. The sound was sharp, satisfying. I placed the two halves side by side on the shelf, next to the diploma. Two halves of a story, the price of belonging and the cost of letting go. The next morning, Ben returned with a notebook. He placed it on the table with mock ceremony. "Okay, hear me out," he said, flipping it open. "What if we start something together?" I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" He tapped the page. Across the top, in his messy handwriting, were two words: boundaries and bravery. I smiled. "That sounds like a self-help book." He laughed. "No, a scholarship. For students who've been cut off by their families but keep going anyway. You know, the ones like us." I leaned forward, reading his notes. He'd already thought it through: funding ideas, application criteria, even a name for the annual event. The courage to continue. "We'll start small," he said. $1,000 a year, maybe two. Enough for textbooks, rent, or just breathing room." Something warm spread in my chest. "You really think we can pull it off?" He shrugged. "Why not? We know what it's like to build from nothing. Maybe we can make it easier for someone else." We spent the afternoon sketching out the plan, our tea growing cold beside us. Every detail we added felt like a quiet act of rebellion against everything we'd survived. Within a month, we had the website up, a simple page with a red banner at the top and a single line beneath it. "For those who chose peace over permission." Our first donor was one of my colleagues at the extension school, who had overheard me mention it during office hours. Then another donation came from a student. Then two more from strangers. Within weeks, the fund was real. Our first recipient was a young woman named Maya, a nursing student who'd been disowned after coming out to her family. When we told her she'd been chosen, she cried through the entire call. "It's not about the money," she said. "It's knowing someone understands." After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, watching the light fade over the city. The air was still, and for the first time, so was I. That night, I stood by the window, looking out at the soft glow of Cambridge. Somewhere below, laughter drifted from a nearby restaurant. The world went on unconcerned, unbroken. I thought about how many years I'd spent waiting for applause that would never come, how long I'd begged to be seen. Now I understood. I didn't need an audience to be proud of myself. I looked at the torn paper on my shelf, at the diploma beside it, at the small vase of daisies Ben had left behind. "If no one claps for you," I whispered, smiling faintly, "clap for yourself." Then, the sound of my hands meeting was quiet but firm. A soft, private echo of everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. 1 year later, I found myself walking through the same gates I had once left in silence. Harvard Yard looked almost identical to the day I graduated. Green lawns, proud parents, the rhythmic hum of excitement hanging in the air, but something in me had shifted. I wasn't here to be seen or applauded. I was here because they had invited me back not as a student this time, but as a guest speaker for the new graduating class. It felt surreal standing behind the stage, watching a new wave of students adjust their caps and fix their gowns. The air carried that familiar scent of grass and paper programs, mixed with the nervous laughter of people who didn't yet know that endings often look a lot like beginnings. The dean shook my hand and whispered, "Your story reached more people than you realize, Masha. Thank you for coming." When my name was called, I stepped up to the podium. The sunlight was warm on my face, and in the front row, rows of families held their phones high, ready to record. A year ago, I would have searched that crowd for two specific faces. Today, I didn't need to. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady. "A year ago, I stood where you are now, cap slightly crooked, heart full of hope, believing that this day would fix everything. I thought success would make me lovable. I thought achievement would make me belong." A few quiet laughs rippled through the audience, the kind that meant they understood. I smiled faintly and continued. "But life has a strange way of testing what you believe in. Sometimes the people you hope will clap for you never show up. Sometimes love demands silence while it hurts you, and you convince yourself that's just the price of peace. I'm here to tell you it's not." The yard had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to still. If love asks for silence while it hurts you, it's not love, it's debt, and you don't owe anyone peace that costs your soul. For a moment, I let the words hang in the air. They weren't just for the audience. They were for the girl I used to be, the one who'd stood at this same podium with shaking hands, waiting for faces that never appeared. "I spent years trying to earn what was supposed to be freely given," I said softly. "But peace doesn't come from pleasing others. It comes from choosing yourself, even when it breaks the story you were taught to live." There was movement in the crowd, a few people wiping their eyes, a few nodding quietly. A group of students near the front row held each other's hands. I caught the reflection of crimson tassels swaying in the sunday. As I stepped back from the microphone, the photographer motioned for me to pause. I smiled, instinctively reaching for my lapel, and there it was, pinned just above my heart, a single red flower. The same kind I'd once worn to help my parents recognize me in a crowd that day they never came. Now, it meant something entirely different. Not hope for their approval, but gratitude for my own survival. The camera flash captured it, the smile, the flower, the quiet reclamation of a symbol I'd once worn for someone else. After the ceremony, students came up to me, some shaking my hand, others hugging me like they'd known me their whole lives. One young woman said, "I watched your speech online last year. I finally cut off my father last month. I thought it made me cold. Now I think it made me whole." I squeezed her hand. "It did," I said. "Wholeness always feels cold at first, but give it time, it warms up." That evening, when the sun dipped low and the crowd had thinned, I stayed behind in the yard for a moment. The chairs were half empty now, the banners swaying in the breeze. I walked to the same spot where my two seats had once stood empty. The grass had grown back. No trace of absence remained. I took a slow breath and looked around. There was no sadness left, only understanding. "If you've ever had to walk away to protect your peace," I said softly, "you're not heartless, you're healing." A gust of wind carried the words outward, scattering them like confetti across the empty lawn. I smiled, imagining someone, somewhere, hearing them when they needed it most. Before I left, I turned once more toward the camera crew, who were packing up the last of their equipment. I leaned slightly forward, smiling directly into the lens the way you'd smile at an old friend, and said, "Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Because somewhere, someone is setting themselves free at this very moment." The wind caught my hair, the red flower glowed faintly in the fading light, and for the first time, I walked away from Harvard not as someone who had lost a family but as someone who had built her own peace.